I know that I look young, but in a little over a month, I will become a medical doctor. And I think at the end of my journey in medical school, my final year in medical school, is the perfect time to look back at the education system that I spent so long in. If you were to count which grade I'm in, I would be in something like the 20th grade. So it's a long time. But this was me on my first ever day of kindergarten, and I loved it. I went from K to 12 with no problems, graduated valedictorian of my high school, went to Cornell, and subsequently entered medical school. Now, I tell you this not to impress you, but rather to impress upon you that by all means, I succeeded in the system. I should love it, right? It's a system that I did very well in and I flourished. But you'll see that I'm the exception and not the rule. If I did so well, why would I want to change the system? So I started to ask questions, and I realized there was a big need for change. And so this is observation number 1. 21st century students are using 20th century systems to learn 19th century ideas. What do I mean by this? Well, modern kids are using an old, outdated system to learn from a selection of courses that have no connection to their interests. So how could you be spending 6.5 hours a day in school and for almost your entire childhood and young adult life and not be exploring your interests, and your classes aren't even connected to each other? So this is a problem to keep in mind throughout the talk. Another observation, high school is less satisfying according to students themselves. It's less engaging. Do we have any evidence of this? Yes, and it comes from none other than a Gallup poll which was conducted with students. And what it showed was that in elementary school, 74% of students were involved and engaged. But by the time you got to high school, you're at 44%. So we know that students are disengaged, but why? You can't say, oh, well, school is boring and kids don't like school, because you had them in elementary school. You had them. 74% of kids were involved and engaged. So what happened? And even so, in high school, you get to choose your classes. So in theory, you at least have some choice over it. So this is another problem to keep in mind. The structure of school lends to this problem. So this is what high school looks like. It's a tier. And we all know that tiers and hierarchies really work well, among people, among young students, and they don't. So at the top of it, and this is not to scale, but at the top of the tier, you have honors students who take honors, AP, IB courses. They're usually the same kids that are taking lots of the same courses. And then you have everyone else. The vast majority of the students, the so-called non-honor students who don't have that fancy label of honors. So keep in mind this structure. So another observation, if you do the math, we are wasting a lot of time. And you'll see how it works out. So you're going to begin to see a math problem emerge, and it's going to solve itself at the bottom, so you don't need to know any math. But what's interesting about this is it's just to give you a sense of scale. It's not exact math. It's just to show you how much time we may or may not be wasting. So we know that there's 8 courses per day in high school on average. And you'll see for high schools that don't follow this format, it'll still work out. The math will still work out in the end. And we know, let's say that 4.5 of those courses students are feeling disengaged in. Where do we get that from? Well, we know 44% are engaged, so 100% minus 44 is 56% times 4.5. So we start with 4.5. We know that courses last approximately 45 minutes each. We know that the school year lasts 180 days, and there are 14.9 million students enrolled in high school. So when you do the math and all that math, it comes to a modest 1 million years of collective disengagement. Now, to put that number in perspective, we're disengaging students 200 times the recorded length of history. Imagine if we just used a small percentage of that time to do something good, let kids feel good about themselves, let them work on some real world projects. But we don't. And I'll let you stick to the imagination and I'll stick to the numbers. But what if we just used 1% of that time? That would be a period of 10,000 years. We went from the first written word to the supercomputer and collectively in half that amount of time. So you see a lot of time is being wasted. And you may say, oh, well, I'm not in high school. I haven't been in high school for many years. You might not know somebody with a kid in high school. But you could see how this could affect you because your tax money is paying for this. So we've identified that high school is, to a large extent, dissatisfying, it's disconnected, and it's disproportionately unproductive. So let's get rid of this. This is the academy-style school. It allows you to take 8 disjointed classes and curate them towards your interests or skills. And we're not advocating a particular type of academy or a particular one, but rather, as long as kids are being encouraged to explore their interests and explore career options, then it stops becoming a school and it starts becoming an academy. Now, one of the worst things about high school, and if you think about it, is, or in people in general really, is hierarchies. You know, gangs, exclusive clubs, social cliques. And if I were to ask you right now to imagine a bad memory that you had in high school or some problem you had in high school, chances are your mind would go to a problem created by one of these hierarchies. But what if we took people's love of being part of a team and put it towards something good? So what kind of teams are we talking about? Well, we created, and we like the acronym schema: science, humanities, exploration, mathematics, arts. And what that does is it allows you to at least choose something that you're interested in. Now, can you switch between academies if you decide halfway through you don't like it? Yes, in fact, it's encouraged if you do that, because that means you ruled out an entire field by the time you get to college. So it's actually a good thing. And you drop into the Explorations Academy, which just signifies you've explored multiple interests. And in that way, the traditional high school liberal arts curriculum is preserved. So both systems win in this. Now you may be saying, well, how do you meet state requirements? How does a school like this meet state requirements for the core classes? Well, you spin a class into the corresponding academy. So a kid, again, who's interested in science, in their English class, they'll still learn the core principles of English, but there'll be a theme of reading about great scientific passages, about learning how to write a scientific abstract, which I didn't even learn how to write until college, and how to glean results quickly from a scientific paper. So you now see how their English class can apply to their science interests. So the academy-style schools, they sound really good, but do they work? So we're in New Jersey today, so this is the list of the top 10 high schools in New Jersey according to the US News and World Report, most recent one. Now, let's see how many of these schools are academy-style schools, which will now show up in red. So 9 out of 10 of the top 10 high schools in New Jersey are, by our definition at least, academy-style schools. So they're doing well. They're doing really well. And if you look at other surveys and other top 10 lists, they also continue to do well. This is another example. The city of Paterson is a city that's been notoriously having trouble with its education system. It's a state-run district. It's been run for 25, 30 years by the state, and it faces a different problem than probably many of the top 10 schools would face. It's an inner city, and gang violence is prominent. So what this city decided to do was to, around the 2009 era, create a district plan which involved the creation of academies from their public high schools. And around that time is also when you start to see the graduation rate start to climb, 46% up to 78%. Now, it's dangerous to assume that academy-style schools were the direct cause of this, or that just because kids are graduating at higher rates means that they're going on and that it's having any impact. But the graduation rate, in fact, has gone up, and with it has gone up the attendance of 2- to 4-year college programs. And although we can't solely pin the success on an academy-style school, that was the biggest change that was implemented in that 2009 era and continues to be implemented. So the results are encouraging, to say the least. Now, there's no point of a movement unless, an educational movement really, unless the students want it. And there is almost no data, and believe me, I've checked, that evaluates student opinions on these types of schools. And partially because they don't have a unified definition. Whether or not that's the reason, whether it's because the data's not out there, it's difficult to find, and it's probably outdated. So we decided to collect some to all the students from Morristown High School, asking, are you in favor of an academy-style school like this? And For a respondent-only poll, we got a pretty high turnout, which was 150 students who responded the following. 87%, almost 87% were in favor of this style of school. So again, although this was respondent-only and its preliminary results, they're encouraging, and we'd like to collect more. All good studies face criticism. All good ideas face criticism. And this is a sampling of some of the criticism academy-style schools have faced. So we'll go through them and see why they're really inaccurate. So first thing you might hear, well, academies make students think about careers far too early. And this one, I hear it a lot, and it really kills me, because how could you, like I said, how could you have kids in school for 6 hours a day, most of their young childhood and young adult life, and they're not supposed to even put a thought about their careers? And even so, what is worse, being too early or being too late? This idea of, well, it'll work itself out in the end and put it off till later, it's really a problematic way of thinking and not a pragmatic way of thinking. In high school, college, and medical school, one thing I learned that being too early is never a bad thing, and being too late is always a bad thing. And in Japan, which is a comparably wealthy country with high education standards, kids have to decide their career. Essentially, they have to decide their career by 18 because their colleges and their training programs are intertwined. So you basically would have had to know before you go to college. And so really, why can't we do that here? And hint, there's no reason why we can't. Let's replace that. So it's never too early, but you can certainly be too late. Another one, well, you have time to explore these interests in college. And this misconception is also related to the first problem. You certainly have time to explore interests in college, but why would you not explore them earlier? The academy program has nothing to do with college. In fact, a student in a science academy, to continue an example, can continue on and do an English major in college. So what did the kid in the science academy accomplish? What's different about him? Well, he was able to rule out an entire field of careers before he got to college, which is the reason why presumably he chose doing an English major. And because of that, he's now maybe 2 to 3 years ahead. And for parents who are listening, we're talking about tuition money, time and money. This has real-world consequences. So no more wasted time in college. Now another one, well, academies are a new idea and they haven't been put to the test. Well, this may be your first time hearing about academy-style schools, and they go by many different names. But depending on your definition of them, they're as old as I am, about 26. And if you were to look at when these programs begin to emerge, there's no set date, but you generally start to see them in the early 1990s. And by 2016, 2017, they're dominating all of the high school ranking lists. So they do well. And more importantly, the kids are going on to do great things. So academies have been tried and proven. Now the last one, how could you possibly support an overhaul like this, even just from a financial standpoint? And this is what you might be thinking to yourself, well, Anthony, you're young, you're idealistic, you're well-intentioned, but you're naive to the problems of the world. Everything runs on money, and in the end, everything needs a budget, especially the school system. Well, let's talk about money then. The government and various third-party organizations have been giving out money like candy to schools that are willing to take it. So why would you not accept the money and modernize your school at the same time? It's really a good idea. And you could imagine why not. If you're an administrator, you've been comfortably in your school for a long time doing the way things have been done, well, you could see why schools haven't done it. The government believes we need a change as well. So we created Real World Academy, which is trying to create advocacy for academy-style schools. One of the problems is that academy schools, like I said, don't have a great, there's academies, pathways, tracks, mini academies, STEM programs, STEAM programs. You see how they go by different names, and it's hard to find a concrete definition for them. So that's just one problem. But then, how do you take an existing school and create an academy from it? How do you figure out which academies are appropriate for each school? How do you train teachers to teach in these environments? How do you create a grassroots movement? How do you have advocacy? Nobody's been able to do it so far, at least to the scale that it needs to be done. And what we think is interesting is that if you sit back and you start connecting people and collecting data, you can do a lot. And So how can a school that has no experience in academy systems adopt one out of the blue? They can't. We've tried. We've went to them. It's almost impossible. So again, we're just starting by collecting data and connecting people. But we think we're off to a good start. Now, how can people help be involved in advocacy? Well, if you're a high school student, you could try to help create some of that data of how high school students, whether or not they want academies, and collect polls like the pie chart I showed earlier. If you're a teacher or a counselor and you feel constrained in what or how you teach, you are not alone. There are so many others like you. And if you're a college student or somebody fresh out of college or somebody looking in between careers, you could volunteer to help create real-world style classrooms. And you could potentially affect thousands of people's lives. And for mentoring programs, medical students and law students are in a great position to do that. So there's a lot that can be done, and we need your help. I leave you again with this. Help us change the world. Thank you.